Today I'm going to be sharing some graphite tips while I work on this portrait. I used to use my mechanical pencil a lot in my work. They're great for small details, plus really nice dark shading when I filled them with my AN high polymer 4B lead. That lead would get nearly as dark as an 8B pencil. It was amazing. The problem is they stopped making that lead. And just for clarification, if you do go looking for that specific product, they still make the AN 4B Stein lead, but it's not the same at all. That's a very hard lead, whereas the high polymer lead was very soft. That's what I used and recommended. While I have a huge supply myself, when I found out they were discontinuing them, I bought everything I could find on eBay. So I pretty much have a lifetime supply, but I didn't like using it since I didn't have an alternative to suggest to you guys. So I finally ordered several different high polymer leads to try out so that I would have something to suggest to you so I could go back to using the mechanical pencil, which I love. So far, the only one of everything that I've ordered that I've really taken the time to test was a huge winner. This is the Faber-Castell Super Polymer 2B lead. Now, for the beginning part of the video where I'm using the mechanical pencil, I'm using my old AN4B high polymer lead. But once my Faber-Castell lead came from Amazon, I switched over to that just to test it out. It was so similar, you really can't tell the difference. I mean, it is a minor difference. Enough so that I didn't even take the time to replace it back to my AN4B lead. I just continued the piece with the Faber-Castell 2B lead. It worked beautifully. It is definitely something that I can recommend. And just as a quick disclaimer, I did purchase all of the supplies that I'm using for this video myself, except for one of the sets of graphite pencils that I had gotten from Faber-Castell, if you remember in that big art haul box a few months ago. This is not a sponsored video. All of the opinions in this video that I'm sharing are my own. All of the supplies that I'm using are linked in the video description. If you are supporters over on Patreon, make sure to head over where you've got almost 6 hours of footage for this project if you want to follow along. If you're unfamiliar with Patreon, for as little as $4 a month, you get access to all of my weekly 1 to 2, sometimes 3, or 6 in this case, long painting and drawing lessons. You'll also get access to over 200, I can't count, of my older lessons as soon as you sign up. If you're not sure if Patreon will be a fit for you, I have a free 2-hour-long demonstration in colored pencil on my Patreon library page, just for checking it out. The link for all of this is in the video description. Now onto this project. The background you're seeing here, you can watch in real time from the live stream. I will put a link to that in the video description as well, or a card will pop up so you can watch how I did that. That was done with graphite powder, which is one of my favorite things. It makes blending backgrounds like that very quick, and that's what you've seen me blending the arm with there. That little spongy thing on the end of that, it looks kind of like a palette knife. That was done with the graphite powder just to get my base. Then I'm going on top of that with my pencils and erasers and all of those things there. Lots of tools. One of the products that I really like are kneaded erasers. And what I do with those, you don't rub them back and forth. I mean, I guess you could, but you'll get a very streaky result. If I want to lighten something up, I can take that kneaded eraser and just dab it on the area like I was previously doing on the shoulder, and it pulls up bits of the graphite without having big eraser marks. So you can lighten things up really easily that way. Now, when you look at something like her dress, this looks extremely overwhelming. All of those little dots, all of the lace especially. If you want to get more detail, even more than I have here, go larger. It makes it way easier to get that tiny detail. Here, you're only going to get so much given the size. But what I want to do, or what I chose to do on this, I went through with my pencil and circled all of those little, the dots, the circles. I outlined those with my graphite pencil, and then I used my shading tool to shade in just to get a really soft transition with those grays. Now you've got to watch. One of the things that happens when you're up against the white of the paper, you're going to have a tendency not to make your darks dark enough. They will always feel like they're too light. Now, it's okay if you leave them too light and go back and darken them later, but do make sure that you go back and darken them later on. One of the biggest mistakes that especially new artists, or I've even seen very advanced artists make, and there have been times where I made it a lot myself, is not getting your darks dark enough. If you don't get your contrast, your values correct, that's going to make the biggest difference in your artwork. Get your darks dark enough, your lights light enough. That is what usually will make everything look a lot more realistic. If you make everything very muted, where you keep everything kind of safe, you're afraid to go too dark, it's just not going to look as realistic. It doesn't matter how amazing your drawing skills are, how accurate it is. If you don't get that really nice contrast between your lights and your darks, it's not, your work isn't going to have that realism that you're going for, assuming that is your goal. So as I'm laying through this, or going through this, I'm not going super dark. As you can see from the finished painting, I definitely will need to keep darkening this up. It is safer to start out a little lighter than you think you need to go, and then continuously build up to your darker values. So I'm not saying jump into making things too dark to start with, but you do want to make sure the end result, you have those dark areas dark enough. And like I said, when you're up against the white of the paper, it does make it fairly hard to judge the values. So I'll come back through once I get the lace in her dress and the areas around it shaded in. I'm going to go back through and darken this up quite a bit. And I'm using the Tombow Mono Eraser, which has this nice tiny point to clean up my circle. So if I overshade, get a little graphite where I don't want it on the polka dots, I can use that Tombow Mono Eraser and just lift some of that back out so I have those nice clean circles. As I move on to the lace, these are just dots. That's all it is. Don't try to overthink this. It can get very, very overwhelming. Work in small sections at a time and really just follow the dots. Mine is not exact to the reference photo. This is a reference photo I found over on Pixabay. It's not exact. I just need it to be semi-close so that I get that look of lace. I don't care if it's the exact pattern of the lace. I don't think it makes a big difference, especially on something that's not huge. This is not a huge piece. If I was working larger, I probably would go more exact. Lots of little dots, need to keep that pencil sharp, and I will come back through with that mechanical pencil to get the darker areas. But for this, I'm starting with a mid-range. This one is probably my HB, either a 2H or an HB lead is what I'm starting with. Then I will darken up to my 2B lead when I want those darker sections. But it's very important that you don't have everything end up the exact same value. That's one of the things too that will make your work look very flat. If everything is done with an HB, same pressure, you're not pushing very hard or using a light hand, everything's just coming out this mid-range solid, it looks very, very flat. So as I layer, see how I start pulling in some of these darker bits of graphite into some of these circles or dots, whatever we want to call them. But variation is a really, really big deal. And so what I do is just look at the reference photo. Where are my darks? Where are my lights? And of course I can come back through and darken all of this up as I need to. You want to try to keep those pencils fairly sharp. Mine's getting a bit dull there. It's hard to get the fine details if your pencil is not sharp enough. The other thing is if you're trying to get really smooth blending, if your pencil isn't very sharp, the pencil just hits the top of the tooth of the paper. It doesn't get into all the little nooks and crannies. And so that's how you end up, or one of the ways that you end up with a very grainy, gritty look, which is not really what I want here. Now that I've got the lace in, I'm not up against the white of the paper. It was much easier for me to see where I needed to darken up areas of her dress. Now working on her hair. Hair, you don't want to think of hair as individual strands. If you were to look at a friend or family member, if you've got someone in the room with you, or a photograph of somebody, look at it, you don't see very many individual strands. You'll see a few, but not very many. For the most part, what you're really seeing are clumps and clusters of the hair, and that is what you want to do here. We don't want this stringy, strandy look, and that's what, that stringy, strandy, I don't think strandy is a word, but that's what happens if you try to draw in all those individual strands. You end up with, it almost looks like zombie hair, like very unwashed, scraggly. We don't want that look. Doesn't look cute. What we want to do is create clumps and clusters. Look at your reference photo and where are your lights and your darks. And I'd recommend working on a small section at a time. Here you can see I'm working on just the end of that braid. And as I work on the rest of the braid, it's the same thing. I just break it down into one little zone that I'm going to focus on. Now, while I layer my graphite pencils, what I typically do is start with my lighter lead. So either a 2H or a 4H. 4H is usually my go-to for my base layer. I fill that in and then I slowly layer darker values or softer pencils, which is going to give me a darker lead on top of that. What this is doing, that 4H or the 2H, the harder lead is going to get into the nooks and crannies of that paper. Nooks and crannies, nooks and cranny. I don't know. You guys hopefully know what I'm talking about, but you'll get into the tooth of the paper with that harder lead. The softer lead lead doesn't get in so much, but the softer lead gives you that darker value. By layering the 4H or the 2H, whatever you want to go with for your harder lead, first, I'm filling in those nooks and crannies. So now when the dark goes on top, let's say I put a 2B or a 4B on top of that, I'm not up against the white of the paper. It's not the white of the paper throwing, gosh, I can't talk, white of the paper showing through. It's the 4H or the 2H. So it's still light, but it's not as light as the white of the paper. So I'm able to get a much smoother end result by layering this way. First a 4H or a 2H, then layering darker. Maybe I'll go to an HB next, and then up to a 2B, and I may work my way up to a 4B or an 8B or whatever else. But you want to do that with light layers. If you push very hard with your pencils, you're going to flatten the tooth of the paper, and you're not going to be able to get additional layers on top of that. In addition to that, if you flatten the tooth of the paper, or if you're pushing hard with your pencils and flattening the tooth, you're burnishing, you're polishing that graphite. Graphite will polish to a very, very high shine. And usually we want to avoid that as much as possible. I mean, if I get a little bit of shine here and there, it's not the end of the world for me, but I don't want it to be super shiny all over the place. I think it kind of ruins the aesthetics when you walk by and portions are like glaring, just super, super shiny. Again, some shine doesn't bother me at all. Some artists don't want any, but pushing hard or moving the pencil really fast, that's how you're going to polish that graphite. So I'm going to avoid doing that. But as I layer, same thing throughout this entire braid, I do a soft layer. Some of these soft layers I applied with the graphite powder, which works a lot like the 2H or the 4H, but a lot faster, where that fills in all the little nooks and crannies of the white of the paper, and then I can put my darker values on top. Now the white highlights that you're seeing on the hair, that is being done with my Tombow mono eraser to pull out a few individual strands. So some of my individual strands, and there aren't a lot, but some of them will be done with my mechanical pencil, and some of them are going to be done with that Tombow mono eraser. You don't have to use a mechanical pencil. I just like it because I'm lazy, and then I don't have to sharpen anything. Some of them were actually done with like a 2H or a 4H so that I had some variation in how light or dark those strands were too. And one thing you want to keep in mind when you look at this video, I mean, I have got it broken down into under 20 minutes just for the art itself. This is like 3 weeks worth of work. Don't feel like you should be able to get something like this with this much detail done in a single night. It's not going to happen, or if it does, it's not going to look very good. This is a very, very long process. So if you can go into it expecting it to take you a very long time to complete, you're probably going to be more patient in focusing on those little details. One of the mistakes I made early on when I started with art, I would look at these amazing paintings by artists that I really admired, and they were so detailed, and I would expect to be able to get a painting like that done in a couple of nights, and it didn't happen. It didn't look the same because I was rushing it, and I wasn't intentionally rushing it. It wasn't that I was like, I have to get this done on a deadline. It was just that in my head, for some reason, I thought if you're good, you get things done really quickly. A few brush strokes, and that whole coral should be painted. No, that coral would take me hours and hours and hours, not 2 brush strokes like I was trying to do. So just slowing down can make a huge difference in your work. And you can see here, I'm still working in those kind of small zones that I'm focusing on. Pick one little area and just focus on that. Now I can come back and add details and touch-ups if I want to when I move on to other areas, and I do that all the time. But I'm really focusing on getting the majority of one little zone done before I move on to the next. Now, one of the reasons that I will usually draw the hair before I draw the face on every portrait is the hair is going to, in most cases, be quite a bit darker than the skin tone. And it just makes it a lot easier for me to judge my values when I start working on the face. And every time you see that little spongy palette knife looking brush, that is just wow, brain shut down again. The graphite powder on a soft tool. Those soft tools are the ones that I use when I'm blending powder blender or when I'm using pan pastels. It's SOFFT tool. And again, I'll have the links to the supplies that I'm using in the description. Now this was one of the areas I was having a bit of a hard time judging values until I got more of the grassy areas and more of the shading under her face done. So I got most of the way through it and then left it alone, knowing I would come back later on to do a lot of touch-ups. You can see me using that Tombow mono eraser a lot. The erasers erase, if you've shaded something with a shading tool or with like the soft tool with the graphite powder, those will erase really, really well, like almost up to completely white. If you shade something with the pencils, it doesn't erase quite as light. So for an area like that on her hand, I was able to get a lot of really white highlights with that Tombow mono eraser because I had shaded it in with the soft tool and graphite powder. Now moving on to her face, that first eye you can see in real time on the live stream, so I'll have that in the description as well. And I'm going to start here on her mouth. Now you want to watch your light source. If she was sitting upright, she's laying down, so the light is hitting her mouth a little bit different than on most portraits. You want to watch where the light is hitting her lips. Usually on portraits, the upper lip will be darker than the bottom lip because most people, the upper lip is downturned. Depends on the person, so you do need to watch that in your reference photo. Don't just assume every single person is that way. It depends on the person, but more often than not, the upper lip will be darker than the bottom lip just because it's cast in shadow. Now here is slightly different because of where that light source is. It's coming from the side. And if you're somebody who struggles with light source, don't overthink it. Just look at your reference photo. Try to copy what you see on the reference photo. That is one of the most valuable things you can teach yourself to do, is copy what you see. Now, that doesn't mean everything needs to be exact. I'm always going to make adjustments based on what I think will make it look better, but you do want to look at that reference photo and really pay attention to what you're seeing. It's very easy to look at something and think, I'm drawing an eye, and I know my brain knows what an eye looks like. So you look at the reference photo once, and then you go to town on the artwork, and then you look back at the reference photo and think, wow, that looks nothing like the reference photo. Spend a bit more time looking at the reference photo, study the reference photo, start teaching yourself to see what's really there and not what your brain thinks is there. Those are two very, very different things. And it takes time and practice to get yourself to really learn to see what's actually there. But the more you paint, the more you draw, the more you're going to start to notice. It will happen without you even trying. It's inevitable. But you have to paint and draw more in order for those details to start being obvious to you. Now, I'm not finished with her face. I need to get some of these darks in here so that I can judge the values better and make the bottom side of her face, the edge of her face there, I guess that would be her left side, is going to fade out into the dark. And so it's really hard for me to judge the values until I get some of these darks in. So I'm going to hold off on finishing up her face and come down and finish this bottom corner of grass, most of which is out of focus. Now, if you look at the background right now, look at all those circles that I did on that first live stream. That, when I was finished with the painting, I took my photos, I thought I was completely done. And when I loaded it into Photoshop, I realized, or Lightroom, I forget which I was using, it was like the background was standing out too much. It was distracting too much from her. I really wanted to darken it up a lot. So I went back after I took the photo. Once I thought it was done, went back and just darkened it, removed a lot of those circles. So if you look at the finished photo versus what you see here, everything is well, it's too light anyway on the video just because my light over my easel washes everything out. But it's so busy where all those circles are. And so that's one of those things that once I was done filming, I didn't include this in the video, but I went through with my graphite powder and just smudged those out. I left some of the circles, but if you look at how much darker I went, really made a difference in pushing her forward, because here, when you look at and her face is too light, her hair, everything's too light right now. But when you compare that with that background, she's just blending right in. This is actually a good example. When you combine the fact that I wasn't done making everything dark with the fact that my light is over or washing that out, look at the difference between what the video is showing and what the finished photo is. That finished photo is what it looks like in person. But you can really see what I'm talking about before, where if everything's muted, if you don't have the really dark darks, it's just flat. When you look at that versus the finished photo, which, like I said, is what it really looks like in person, huge difference. Don't be afraid to get that contrast. And when you get to this stage, everything's mostly done. This is the stage where I'll go through and usually start really making my darks a lot darker. And that doesn't mean to make everything darker. You want to pay attention to that reference photo. What areas are dark? Make sure you leave your lights light too. You want to get that really nice high contrast. I've told this story several times. I went with my friends to an art gallery. There were a lot of newer, younger artists that were displaying their work. And there was an artist who had done this amazing, amazing detail. It was hanging above somebody's painting who was kind of sitting on the floor against the wall. The one that was sitting on the floor against the wall was definitely done by somebody who was more of an amateur, but they had super high contrast, and that high contrast piece wasn't drawn as well. Didn't matter. Everybody was drawn to that piece, and the one that was hanging above it that took more technical skill, you can tell the artist was more practiced, but it didn't have that punch, that high contrast that the high contrast painting below it had. If you can get that high contrast in there, if you can get your values right, that will make up for a lot of other mistakes that there may be in your work. It'll be so much more interesting to look at if you get your darks really dark, your lights really light. That is what is going to draw more people into really wanting to look at your work longer. One of the things that I like to do when I am finished with my work, or I think I'm finished, take a photo with your cell phone and mess around with the contrast and the values and such in any photo editing app. Does it look better if you make things darker or if you make things lighter? Play around with that. If it makes it look better in the photo, go back to your artwork and make those changes there. It's a lot less scary if you've seen how good it can look if you mess around with it on a photo editing app first. If you guys have been following my live streams, you know I'm having a house built right now. So I thought I'd give you a quick update of the build. This is going to be my office. Those French doors, those will be clear. They're just taped off from painting. This hallway right here, which just looks like a big wall, I'm going to be painting about, I'm guessing maybe an 18-inch tall stripe all the way down the length of this wall. And it's going to be a mural, an ocean scene with coral and fish. It'll be right what you see there on the left. No, that's my right. That's not my left. But I'm going to do a mural all the way down that. I will definitely be live streaming portions of that process. This closet that I just passed will be where all of my Frederick's canvases are stored. As we work our way down this way, this room here is where Chicken and Nugget will be, along with my husband's computer. So you'll probably see a lot of videos in there. I can show you guys some of their fun little tricks once we get moved in there. Right now, I can't because there are boxes everywhere in their current room, so it doesn't make for good filming. So as we come out of the hall space, this is the living room, kitchen, and dining area. We don't have counters yet. Those are going to be gray quartz when they come in. And a random planning center. If you have suggestions on what I should do with this space, I have no idea. Most people, I guess, use it as like an office, but I have an actual office. So I'm really not sure what exactly I'm going to do with that corner. Let me know in the comments any ideas, any creative ideas you may have for that space. Now we will head into the studio. I am a terrible cameraman. I'm sorry if I'm making you dizzy here. This is the art studio. I am so excited about that bay window. The whole house is going to have a very dark wood. It's a wood look tile through everywhere, which is going to make it nice. So if I spill paint, it'll be easy to wipe up or clean up. Here is my closet, which I just have to show everybody because I can't get over the size, and I don't even have to share this closet with my husband. This one is all mine. I'm pretty excited. I also don't have to use it to store art supplies like I currently do with my much smaller closet, so that is really exciting. We are set to move in, or it's set to be finished between the middle of November and middle of December. I'm hoping for December because my lease at my apartment isn't up till February, so I'm going to be doing double mortgage and rent, which is kind of scary and very expensive. So hopefully the later this is finished, the better. But yeah, this is where we're going to move soon and where new videos will be filmed soon. My backyard, which has no grass yet. Yay, so pretty. Look, a wall, very exciting. Have you subscribed yet? If not, I have a handy button right there. It's round, has an orange arrow going towards it. If you click on that, that'll help you to keep up to date with all of my new art videos every single week. You may also want to click on that bell icon because YouTube is pretty bad about notifying people when new content goes up.